in doing research, just kind of on your background, you've done quite a bit, right? We were talking, you're a staff writer for T Nation. You have your own business, and you were, I have it written down here. You were working for the St. Louis Blues, right? At the center of
not the Blues themselves. I was the head strength and conditioning coach at the Central Institute for Human Performance, which was the official center for the Blues.
Right. Okay.
So we were not like affiliated. Like the official strength coach at the time was Nelson Ayotte, who was like the head of our center. I did work with plenty of the Blues players, like Keith Tkachuk, Bill Guérin back then, and some of these guys. We probably had like 20 of the Blues players turning there. We have a few Cards players, a few Rams players. Steven Jackson was there.
Okay, not a bad athlete in his own right.
Yeah, actually, I didn't stay there that long though, because I actually met my wife to be like 2 weeks before leaving for St. Louis. Of course, it was just a thing at the time, right? Yeah, and she doesn't speak English, right?
So she speaks French?
Yeah, only French.
I'm taking a leap out there. Yeah, so, I found out about you through neurotyping, but your company does all sorts of things. For the people who are listening who might not have been exposed to what your team is doing yet, can you kind of give just an overview of, your company's mission and the types of things that you guys are doing?
Well, a combination of anything related to training, getting in better shape. I train people either online or in person, although nowadays it's more online because I'm traveling quite a bit for seminars.
Yeah.
But we have people ranging from pro athletes, Olympians, all the way down to just the average people who just want to look better. Of course, my own specialty is more on the performance side of things. Whereas I have some team members, some coaches who are more specialized in just looking good naked. So that's how our clients are separated. I also, of course,
that's a good distinction.
There you go. Yeah. Well, but it's not the same thing. You can actually look good and perform great, but if you want to optimize one, you will need to use some different strategies, especially when it comes to like really fine tune your physical performance. Now, also the thing I like to do most, of course, is more the educational side of things. So I give seminars, of course, before the crisis. I was doing them mostly abroad, Europe, Eastern Europe, Australia. I had like a big trip scheduled to Asia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Beijing, and
Wuhan.
Like, yeah, well, probably. But of course, the whole thing started 1 week before I left. I didn't want to go, but my wife didn't want to go. But my partner said, "It's overblown. I mean, China says it's safe." Dude, remember SARS, right?
Yes,
I'm not going there.
Man, thank God it was a week later. I mean, if you'd been, you would have been stuck.
Would have been stuck there. That would have been the biggest problem. I mean, because honestly, I don't believe it's that bad. I mean, I don't go out when I give seminars. I'm at the gym or the room, and I'm at the hotel room. That's it.
Yeah.
I don't go out. But the problem was if I'm stuck there and my wife is either alone at home with a kid, then she's going to have a rough time.
Yeah.
Like a young baby. And once I come back, she would still be insecure if I might give it to the baby or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
So thank God it didn't happen.
Yeah. And is this your first, or how many kids do you have?
Yeah, that's the first one.
Oh, congratulations. How old?
19 months.
19 months. Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's one thing that this whole situation is pretty cool because we are actually like almost over teaching because we're spending like 10 hours a day with the kid. Now he's at 18 months old. He already knows more than half of his alphabet and he knows like 10 colors.
Oh, that's awesome.
For an 18-year-old, that's pretty solid.
That's really good because my little guy, he's 2.5. And you know what? He's a sponge, and I feel like I'm not dedicating as much time to him learning as I should, but we're spending time with our daughter who's over 5. So she's pulled out of preschool, kindergarten's next year. And I mean, he's just picking things up by listening in the background that I didn't know that like at his age he was capable of doing yet. And I'm not saying that I have a baby genius. It's almost like they're capable of a lot more than I think we give them credit for.
Yeah, I think that, and that's a pretty cool topic that can actually be a good introduction to neurotyping.
Oh, please. Yeah, I would love to.
Because I believe, of course, I do believe that some kids will have a greater potential, either motor potential or intellectual one, but not as much as what most people think. I think that a lot of what we call potential, either athletic potential or just brain potential or intelligent potential, comes from what we do the first 2 years of our life.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, they're sponges. So it's just a matter of like, even if a kid is like 15% more intelligent in theory, if he receives a lot more information given to him the right way, he might end up a lot smarter than the one who has a greater potential, but the parents leave it alone. I gave a conference at the Ken Fit Pro symposium, and it was called "Your Kid Sucks and It's Your Fault." Basically explaining that all the mistakes you can make when you are raising a kid, and the biggest one, and that's where I want to introduce the neurotyping system.
Please.
The biggest one is putting your kid in front of a screen.
Okay.
It could be a flat screen TV, could be a smartphone, could be a tablet, could be a laptop.
Yeah.
Because these devices, on top of like just being distracting, and they can become addicted to it very, very fast, they emit something called blue light. Mm-hmm. Probably you haven't heard of it. Now, that's the way these flat screen project images. They project blue light. It's a spectrum of light that targets the dopamine receptors. Mm-hmm. It's been shown that, for example, when you're exposed to blue light, it lights up your brain. It activates your brain. It amps it up.
Yep.
So that's why if you watch those screens before going to bed, it's much harder to go to bed, especially if you're sensitive to dopamine.
Yeah. Now,
dopamine, for those who don't know, is one of the main neurotransmitters. And it is, in part, what we call the pleasure neurotransmitter. So when you target the dopamine receptors, you stimulate a pleasure response. And for addiction is often caused by overstimulation of the dopamine receptors by certain drugs, for example. But so is motivation.
Okay.
Motivation depends on how well you respond to dopamine. Think about it. Every time you achieve something, let's say you have a goal for yourself or you're supposed to do a certain task. And when you accomplish it, you get a dopamine response.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're very sensitive to it, you will get a huge pleasure response, right? So in the future, when you know that you have to make a certain effort to accomplish something, you are much more likely to keep pushing, even if it's hard, because your brain knows, hey, at the end, the reward is worth it.
Yeah.
If the pleasure response is very, very small, then as soon as the thing gets hard, you will stop trying because it's not worth the effort, right? So getting back to our kids, now, the more you stimulate a receptor, it could be the insulin receptors, could be the adrenaline receptors, any receptors in your body that deals with hormone and neurotransmitters, the more you stimulate them, the more likely they are to become resistant. Because they're not supposed to be overstimulated.
Okay.
For example, you look at adult onset diabetes that often comes from eating too much crap, eating too much sugar. What happens is your insulin receptors stop responding to insulin. So you become de facto diabetic. Now, if you overstimulate the dopamine receptors, you can make them resistant. So now your pleasure response is lower and lower and lower and lower. You're more likely to become depressed.
Yeah.
You're more likely to like not have any interest. You will not be as positive, not as driven.
Right.
Because if subconsciously your brain knows, well, you know what? I won't get my carrot at the end, so I won't make the effort. And that's why you see many of these kids being lazy, because the blue light is an overstimulator of the dopamine receptors. That's why these devices are addictive. Sure, looking at Glued Girl 254 on Instagram, it's pretty cool. But that does not justify the fact that you want to go back every 3-4 minutes.
Right.
It's because on top of the content, the blue light creates a pleasure response, making everything magnified.
Yeah.
Right. So an adult can very easily become desensitized to those stimuli, and they will crave more and more. But for a kid, it's even worse.
And like as you're saying this, I'm thinking about myself and my own kids. It's also like if it creates that response, using something like a mobile device or a TV, very little effort involved.
Absolutely.
So it's like, hey, no, let's go run around outside or let's go play baseball. It's like, well, this might be an over exaggeration, but like there's a lot of effort involved to probably get an equivalent dopamine hit.
That's absolutely right.
They might get from passively viewing. Yeah.
But the dopamine hit won't even be similar. You cannot compete with something artificially created like blue light, combined with the fun of watching those cool images.
Yeah.
So the problem is that a child's brain is still developing. So on an adult who receives an overstimulation of the dopamine receptors, they will become desensitized. But if you do a dopamine fast, so no screen for like 10 days, you will reestablish your sensitivity. You will feel a lot better.
Okay. So there's some hope.
A kid, yeah. Well, if I can give you some stories, but a kid can permanently damage their dopamine receptors when they are exposed to that too much when they're young. So, and that kind of segs into what the neurotyping system is.
Yeah.
The system I developed is essentially very similar to all those psychological assessment tests you see, like the enneagrams that you have all those tests that are used by human resources people across the world.
Yeah.
You
I think I've taken 3 of them in the last year.
Dude, like the 16 personality factors.
Yep.
Yeah. and that's actually what my father used to do. I mean, he owned like an industrial psychology firm.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So I actually worked 2 years for him, like with all of those tests, correcting all those tests and stuff like that. That was my introduction to it.
Ah, okay.
When
Very
I did
cool.
my test, he actually was involved in creating the test.
Oh, very cool.
So the neurotyping system is similar to that. It's a personality assessment test, but I don't really want to know someone's personality in that I want to understand how their brain is working. So for example, if you have certain personality traits, it will give me clues about which neurotransmitter system is effective or deficient. And that will give me directions on how should I plan training, because depending on your brain chemistry, you might not tolerate the same type of training. Some people will need a very intense stimulation but can't tolerate the volume. Other people will be completely different. Some people will need variation. Others will need to stick to the same exercise all the time. Diet is even more impacted by brain chemistry. I mean, we know that a caloric deficit is really the key to getting leaner, and that you look at all the popular diets. If protein is equal and total calories is equal, keto, paleo, high carbs, if intermittent fasting, the fat loss results will be the same. The main difference is that nutrients will impact brain chemistry different ways. So some people will feel great on keto, while people will feel suicidal on keto. So even though the result will be the same, if you feel like crap, you're not going to stick with it. Yeah,
that's interesting. And is it a matter of, so like if we go back to the training aspect of it, is it a matter of like, I think you gave the example, high volume, low reps, right? Like someone's more responsive to that. Is that because it's a matter of interest based on like their neurological profile, or is it a matter of the way that their physiology actually will then respond to the type of training as well?
Both. We need to look at it from a motivational standpoint.
Okay. Yeah. And I love this angle.
Because and people need to understand what motivation is. Okay. We often like to see it as like internal versus external motivation, right? There is no such thing as external motivation. There are external catalysts that can increase your internal motivation. Motivation is essentially driven by 2 main neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin. Okay. So on one side, you're going to have dopamine. If you're very sensitive to it, you will be driven by the need to get the pleasure response by accomplishing something. If someone has a weak serotonin system, they will be more motivated by staying safe. So, and every time you need to make a decision, you're subconsciously or in your brain, you will have that fight between reward and safety. Yeah. And depending on which neurotransmitter system is dominant, then you will favor one over the other. That's why you have people who are great risk takers. Other people will always play it safe, even when the data indicate that they actually don't run that much risk. Okay. Now, what happens is that in some people, let's say the weaker your dopamine response is, as we saw earlier, the less naturally motivated you are. So every time something requires an effort or might put your brain in danger, your body in danger, you won't do it. So for example, let's talk training. Squatting that 500-pound bar. Yeah. If I don't have a strong dopamine response and I'm scared of the weight, I'm going to play it safe subconsciously. Yeah. So you're not chasing to increase that weight. Instead, let's just do more sets with less weight. I feel safer that way because if I do more sets with more reps, I can control the weight better. I become better at the movement. I feel comfortable. I can program myself better. Yeah. Whereas Me, if I'm dopamine, I want to beat the workout, because every time I beat a PR, every time I lift more weight, or every time I lift something heavy that amps my brain up, I get a dopamine response. And if I have a strong response, then I will be motivated. Now, you also have external catalysts that will increase. What do they increase? They will increase the dopamine response. For example, let's say that me personally, I'm not that sensitive to dopamine. Okay. So if I train, for example, in my home gym here, I normally play it safe.
Ah, okay.
Because,
And this is an actuality, or is this an example?
That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. So I'm always conservative when I train by myself, but every time I train in front of a camera, when I was shooting videos for T Nation, or if I'm training in a commercial gym and there are people around, I will always have an extra gear. Why? Because my natural pleasure response is low. My dopamine response is very, very small. So I'm not someone I'm pretty neutral as a person.
Yeah.
I don't try new things because my pleasure response is low, but I need other people's approval. So for me, just squatting 500 will not give me a huge pleasure response by itself. But if I'm in a gym and other strong guys are there, or nice looking girls are there, then squatting at 500 in my mind, people will think I'm strong and awesome.
Yeah.
And that increase the dopamine response, because now my brain knows, hey, on top of the response from being successful at the lift, I will have the dopamine response from being admired by these guys that increases the pleasure response. Now the safety to reward balance is tipped a different way. A little bit, and now I'm going to try it. Yeah. So, but some people naturally have that balance here, and they always want to try new things, try beat records. And if you tell them to play conservative, because you cannot have high volume and maximum weights. Okay? You have 6 training variables that you can play with, and they all increase training stress. You can maximize 1 or 2 of them, but the other ones have to be lower.
Right.
So if I'm doing I reps, I sets, lots of exercises, I can't push as hard on these exercises. Otherwise, you're going to crash.
Right.
You can't do that.
Yeah, you can't just go full throttle across the board on everything.
Exactly. So the type of training that will naturally attract you and motivate you will depend on your brain chemistry. If you are very dopamine dominant, very strong dopamine or adrenaline system, you will always want to push extra hard. You want to beat a record, and holding back, like not pushing to your limit, either not trying to add more weight or stopping 2 or 3 reps short of failure, will actually kill your motivation.
Yeah.
Because you don't feel like you're accomplishing something.
It's so fun.
Pardon?
No, and I'm listening, and I'm like, as you're talking, I'm like, man, where am I on the scale? You know, and I feel like I probably lend myself more to the dopamine side of things, the way that you're describing it. And I guess that's what I'm wondering too. And we can talk about what goes into this test and like what sort of criteria you're looking at. But do you find that maybe the perception that someone has of themselves as to like which way they might be more dominant actually proves to be accurate? Or do people sometimes go through your program and find out, oh, whoa, I'm kind of surprised by the results and I didn't think about myself in that way?
Well, that's the limitation of any personality test you're conducting, because there will always be both a personal bias, but also the confirmation bias. Now, I'm this way, so I'm going to answer to prove myself I'm that way. And that's subconscious. That's subconscious. I'm going to give you an example. My first introduction to this mentality of using someone's psychological profile to design training programs was the work of Charles Poliquin. Charles Poliquin was my original mentor, and he created a system that was very similar. But he used a different test. He didn't test for all neurotransmitter. And I found out eventually it wasn't that accurate. But still, it was my introduction. But when I was reading his description, he described like a dopamine dominant type as, if you want to be, these are the best strength athlete. They are the strongest, the most powerful. So me, I wanted to be that guy. So when I did this test, I scored super high on dopamine dominance. But I'm actually very weak on the dopamine side of things, confirmation bias. And some people just will answer any psychological test to look good in front of other people. So that's why it can be a good clue if you're like brutally honest. But normally I still prefer to do an in-person assessment. For example, I use a lot of a lot of body language analysis when I evaluate someone.
Okay.
Like posture, micro expression, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I work with a synergologist. I mean, have you seen the series Lie to Me?
Yeah. It used to be on cable, right? Where his whole thing is like reading body language and
exactly,
yeah.
With Tim Roth. Yeah.
Oh, is that what that profession is?
Yeah, that's the name here is called synergologist, like reading body language, but it's mostly a French thing.
Okay.
Like it's the actual science. Well, it's a pseudoscience, but it's a science.
Sure.
It's by the way, pseudoscience. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Pseudoscience is based oftentimes on scientific principle, but it just cannot be proven.
Sure.
Because you cannot conduct experiments that actually prove without a doubt that it's true. Anyway, so it was created in France by a guy named Philippe Truchet. And then he taught to many people around the world, mostly French language people, because he only speaks French. So you still have the same thing in other countries, but it's not based on the same material.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did the synergology course, and I work with a synergologist, and it's pretty awesome. Like and gesture, facial expression, body posture. When you look up with your eyes, for example, when you're talking, stuff like that.
Right.
So when I'm interviewing someone, I can like look for clues in their body language there to tell me, okay, that will help me confirm or infirm the results of the test. And now, of course, I will ask them questions to see what their personality is.
Yeah. And is it possible to, with regards to like the dominance, is it possible to validate this with actual like testing? Like, could someone provide blood work and then you could get a sense? Or
that's the problem because I told last year I presented at the Swiss Symposium, which is one of the biggest symposium for anything related to health and fitness.
Oh, very cool.
And one guy on the panel was Dr. Mike Meletek. Mike Meletek is a former Olympic weightlifter, which I am also. We train with this. He's much older than I am, but we train at the same gym and with the same people. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he's a doctor now, a medical doctor, and he deals with people with drug addiction and former athletes who had both drug or performance enhancing drug addiction, and try to bring them back, not just physiologically, but also mentally, because these drugs, even performance enhancing drugs, have serious effect on brain chemistry and can completely change your personality.
Yeah.
It can lead to depression, can lead to suicidal thoughts, stuff like that. And he helps them get back to normal physically and mentally. Okay. And I talked to him about it. Well, do you conduct neurotransmitters tests? And said the problem is that these tests are really not accurate for several reasons. First, they actually are precise for neurotransmitter level at only 60%. So right from the start, it doesn't work that well. Second, neurotransmitters are actually released in pulses. So even if I'm measuring my dopamine right now, doesn't mean that it's always elevated.
Right. And I've heard that with other tests. It's like testosterone is so dependent upon time of day of week, what you did the day before. Right. It's like a snapshot of a moment in time.
Correct.
Yeah.
It doesn't give you, but with neurotransmitters, it's even worse because the amount you're producing is only one part of the equation, because the second part is how sensitive your receptors are. For example, I don't produce lots of adrenaline. I have DNA testing that can actually show that, because some of these capacity are genetic, for example. But what I have though is that my receptors are super sensitive to adrenaline. So as a result, in a normal state, when I'm at home, I will be the laziest person ever because my adrenaline is super low. But
I think people would be surprised to hear that, especially those listening, because you know what I mean? Dude. Like, you're very engaging, energetic. You're like, this guy must operate at 100 miles an hour.
That's because I'm under adrenaline. I mean, right now, I'm the alpha version of myself. When I give seminar, it's even worse. Yeah. The more adrenaline I have, the more of an A personality I become.
Yeah.
But in normal situation, I'm as better as you can find. Like, my wife is running the show. I'm whipped, dude. I mean, at home, I'm super lazy because unless I get adrenaline, I'm nothing. But I respond so strongly to it that even a small amount of adrenaline amps me up and put me in. I'm basically Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk,
right?
Or Prince Adam and He-Man. That's basically me, right?
Yeah.
So that's the second part of the equation. The third part is how well do you clear or get rid of these neurotransmitters? For example, let's take what I would call the extreme 1A personality, Donald Trump. Okay. So Donald Trump, what you see is what you get. Okay. He will never change his personality to fit someone's. He's like the elephant in the porcelain store. You might like or not like his style.
Right.
Okay. But at least you know what you're getting.
Yeah.
And he will do anything to win. He will do anything to win.
Yeah.
Okay. Which can be a strength or weakness.
Sure.
But that type of personality, like that, and they are often seen as assholes because they have zero empathy. They don't feel the need to please other people, so they can actually bully people because they have no regard for how they are feeling. That's not because they're bad people. That's because that's the way their brain is wired.
Right.
Well, they're probably bad people, but they're also very charismatic. These people are super charismatic normally.
Yeah. Okay. I have a couple people in my head right now that I know that I'm like, yeah, totally.
A lot of business people are like that because I mean that kind of personality allows you to thrive in very competitive environment, and also environment that requires you to work 28 hours a day.
Yeah.
Okay? Because these people, the main characteristic, they have high dopamine and high adrenaline all the time. The reason is, from a genetic perspective, genetic point of view, the enzyme responsible for getting rid of adrenaline and dopamine is very, very, very slow. It's called the COMT enzyme. It can be fast or slow, and that's genetic. Okay. People with a slow COMT, once they release adrenaline or dopamine, it stays high for hours. The thing is, adrenaline, okay, it makes you think faster. You become like I am right now. I'm expressive. I'm demonstrative. Right. I'm loud. I talk a lot. Okay. That's adrenaline.
Yeah.
It makes you confident, make you driven, competitive, but also impatient, aggressive.
Yeah. Okay.
And also you tend to talk before you think because adrenaline speeds your brain up. You speed your brain up. So you have no filter.
Yeah.
You have no filter because you don't have time to analyze everything because you say it. So people who don't clear adrenaline, they become basically like that 24/7. They don't sleep much. They don't need sleep because they are always in overdrive. And the reason why and again, empathy is another thing, right? Because to me, that's a pretty cool topic because it helped me understand like why someone is that way or that way. I mean, you have like more people who are, and it's funny because, and I don't want to get into politics or everything because I don't want to ruffle feathers, but there's an actual pretty solid connection between brain chemistry and political leaning.
Oh,
people who are on the left will be naturally more empathetic.
Okay.
Because they favor the social side of things, the well-being of others, over financial success and big companies, stuff like that.
Sure.
Whereas people on the right will tend to be a lot more pragmatic, a lot less empathetic because they favor more logic over emotions. And that comes from one neurotransmitter called glutamate.
Okay.
Glutamate is the emotional amplifier. Okay, it increases how strongly you feel. In fact, its official function is memory. Glutamate helps you learn things and store them in your memory better.
Okay,
that's the main function. But the way it does that is it's by amplifying emotion. Okay, the way your brain works. Okay, we all have a selective memory.
Sure.
And not just because we want to forget some things. The brain will decide, okay, this event, I will store it in an important place in my brain. This one I can disregard. Because if we remember absolutely everything we did in our day, we would go crazy.
Yeah.
That would be way too much information to store. And one of the ways your brain decide what will be stored in your brain and what will take the most room is your emotional state when that happens to you. The greater the emotions, the more room it spends in your brain.
Yeah.
Okay. And glutamate, what it does, it amplifies emotions. And by amplifying the intensity of your emotions, you favor storing that information.
Got it.
But if you amplify emotions, then you will be a more emotional person. You feel more strongly. You are probably less objective, more subjective, more driven by those emotions.
Yeah.
Right? More mood swings. Now, that's the first part of empathy. Okay, you need to be able to feel to be empathetic. I mean, if you are someone with zero emotion, how can you feel what somebody else is feeling? Because that's what empathy is. The second component of empathy is being able to recognize the emotional state of a person. Okay,
Yeah.
And not only, so you need to recognize that and feel that. And we have in our brain what are called, and I'm going all over the place here.
No,
Sorry about that.
I think this is really interesting. Quite honestly.
So what happens is, okay, we have in our brain cells called the mirror neurons. Okay. Mirror neurons are responsible in part for learning by watching. Okay. People who are naturally good at learning simply by looking at somebody do a golf swing, for example, it's because their mirror neurons are really good. People with great mirror neurons, they are looking at a sport movement, they can actually feel it almost. See what I mean?
No, I do. I do. Yeah.
So, and the way they discovered that is they did some studies on monkeys. They were looking at which part of the brain worked depending on if the monkey was looking at a banana, was grabbing it, was tasting it, and they saw that different part of the brain would lit up. Then they took a second monkey, put it in front of the first one, also with electrodes on his brain, to see if just by looking, the same zone would light up.
Yeah.
And the same zone would light up, plus a little small zone, the mirror neurons, that would direct which zone of your brain will light up. Just by looking at a motion or something, but the mirror neurons recognize what it is and lights up the zone in your brain that would light up if you were doing it.
Right.
And it actually applies to emotions. So if I'm looking at someone and that person has a certain body language, if I had that body language at one point in my life, my brain will recognize it and light up the same zone in my brain. That's the first part of empathy.
Yeah.
If you have glutamate on top of that, it will amplify the emotions I'm feeling just by looking at you.
Right.
That's what empathy is. True empathy is you're truly feeling bad for the person who feels bad.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the emotions are amplified.
Yeah.
So that would be like true empathy. You also have intellectual empathy. People who can recognize objectively that you feel bad and I want to please you, so I will act like I'm sad about what's happening to you, but I actually don't feel it. That's my case. I'm a people pleaser.
And that's interesting. And is that in part too, like if someone just doesn't have had that shared experience in their background to pull from? Do you know what I mean? Like they don't have that emotional, I don't know, files stored away that they can like light up.
Absolutely. And you need to at least have something similar occur or have a similar body language.
Right.
It doesn't have to be exactly the same. For example, let's say that I've never played golf, but I've played baseball.
Right.
If I'm looking at a golf swing, I can still feel what it feels like.
Sure.
Because I've swung before and it's fairly similar.
Yeah.
But if I've never played, I've never swung anything, that won't register.
Yeah.
So you do need a background, and the more background you have, the more you're going to be able to be empathetic. Also, and we talked about the mirror neuron, but to get back to neurotyping, there's a neurotransmitters involved in that mirror neuron efficiency, and it's called acetylcholine. Okay. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitters that makes great athletes. Okay, the more acetylcholine you have, the better your potential to be a great athlete.
Interesting.
For many reasons.
Yeah. No, that's what I was going to say. So, like, I would love to hear, like, why is that? What role does that play?
Well, the acetylcholine is also involved in learning, in coordination, in storing information in your brain, and more importantly, retrieving that information when it's needed. It's also responsible for making various parts of your brain functioning faster. So it improves coordination. It improves learning, both intellectual learning and motor learning. I can learn a gesture better. I'm more coordinated. Yeah. Also plays a big role in speed of contraction at the muscle. It makes the muscle more sensitive to recruitment. Also makes the stretch reflex better. So you'll be more explosive, more agile. Okay. It has more of an impact on agility than on pure speed, but it still plays a big role in both. And finally, it also it's a neurotransmitter that has the greatest role on creativity. Because creativity is really a matter of three things. Okay. And by the way, creativity is one of the two components of being an exceptionally gifted athlete.
Absolutely.
What we call natural talent. Right. It's a combination of creativity and motor control.
Well, and I'm thinking, and I don't know why this is the first thing that comes to mind, but I think about like Dr. J, right? Like the way he played basketball at that time, he played it in a completely different fashion. Everyone has.
You learn on the playground. You learn on the playground, so you don't. And that's actually the point that I make in many seminars. You could look at Pele at soccer, same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
These guys learn on the street, and on the street, you don't use the typical playing strategy that you force kids to play with using a rigid system.
Yeah.
Rigidity is the enemy of creativity.
Yeah.
They did a study on the German national soccer team.
Okay.
And they looked at the differences between those who were a member of the national team and those who played Division 2 or 3, who were still professional but lower level. And they found no differences in body type, no differences in physical capacity, endurance, strength, range of motion. They found no difference in experience in league play. In fact, those who were Division 2 or 3 had more experience in organized soccer. The one difference was that those who made a national team had more experience in unstructured play, because that is where you develop creativity, like play backyard football, or like backcourt, play basketball on the street. You learn different strategies.
I was just reading, and it was recommended to me. I don't know if you know him, Gavin McMillan. He runs Sports Science Lab out of Irvine, California. He recommended the talent code to me. And there's a section in there about soccer players from Brazil. It's like, why are they producing like a greater percentage of elite soccer players versus all these other countries? Like, is it genetic? And the answer is, mostly no. But they play a very specific type of like backyard soccer with a smaller, heavier ball that like forces them to be more creative in the way.
Smaller space.
Exactly. Operate within smaller spaces that you wouldn't have to operate within if you were just playing organized soccer. And it feels like it's exactly like what you're talking about here.
100%. I worked with a youth soccer program in the city here because the organizer is one of my clients, and he asked me to give a presentation, and yet they actually developed their program based on what I was saying, and they are just kicking ass all over the place. But they basically change their practice setting, and they will change the shape of the field, change the number of players. Sometimes they will play with the one eye patch on. They will play with different balls just to get different conditions. So that's how you build creativity. If you compare that, for example, in soccer or hockey here in Canada, you have kids that are like 9 years old and they're already playing like the same systems they use in the NHL. Why? Because the coach wants to prove that he knows his hockey. Okay? I'm going to play the West Coast offense with like Pee-wee football.
8-year-olds.
Dude, it makes no sense. And like a rigid system is the enemy of creativity. Anyway, to get back to what I was saying, acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter responsible for creativity because it is responsible for accumulating knowledge, experiences, and storing them, then retrieving them when needed to making them in combination with other things to create new solutions. So the more acetylcholine you have, the more creative you are, and the more you will want to experiment in new things. Because that's the thing. When your brain has a capacity, you want to use it.
And so the thing that I'm thinking about, and I imagine some folks listening, like everything you're saying, I keep running it through this checklist of like, does that describe me? And in some instances, I'm like, yes. I'm like, okay, like that's probably why I had some of the success I did, and especially for people with kids, like, is it a situation where it's like, look, you either have it or you don't, and you're kind of limited by that? Or is this the sort of thing, and maybe this is where your neurotyping comes into play, that if you have an understanding of your strengths and weaknesses, by way of that understanding, you can actually train in a way that's going to propel you to hopefully reaching a higher potential than you would have otherwise?
Well, there is a genetic component. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, for example, the enzyme responsible for breaking down adrenaline and dopamine. Genetic. So that's highly genetic. For example, the enzyme that converts glutamate into GABA would also be highly genetic. If you have a lot of that enzyme, you'll be like basically someone with zero empathy, but you'll be amazing under pressure because you will gonna have super high GABA, super low glutamate, so you can more easily control your brain. You don't get overexcited. You don't get out of control under adrenaline, so you can better function. But you won't be a great person to be around it for a long time. For example,
don't invite you to a funeral or a wake.
Correct. Well, these are the guys at funeral that actually try to be the life of the party. We all know these guys, right? So typical person with very high adrenaline, very high dopamine. They can't break it down and no glutamate.
Right.
Typical.
Right.
But as I mentioned earlier, you can impact your brain chemistry based on what you're doing. Stress will have a huge impact on brain chemistry because the hormone released when you're under stress, cortisol, will impact neurotransmitter. That's why we change. Many people change quite a bit when they're under stress.
Oh, yeah.
For example, I'm going to look at just the lockdown. Okay.
Yeah.
Lockdown, people who are normally good people turn out to be total assholes. The reason is that cortisol will actually increase adrenaline. And if you're stressed about your job, about not being able to go outside, cortisol is always high, adrenaline is always high. So you have a problem sleeping, but always aggressive, competitive. When you're playing sport, that's pretty cool. When you're a business guy, it's pretty cool. When you're stuck at home with only your wife and you're competitive, it means I want to pick fight and win the fight.
Yeah.
So you're going to do crazy shit that will ruin your marriage. My prediction is that this whole crisis will lead to a world record in divorce rate and probably suicide.
Yeah, I know. We've off the record, my wife and I have talked about that. It's like this thing, especially folks living in real confined conditions, like all my buddies in New York. And I'm not saying they're going to get divorced. So if anyone's listening, but it's it's going to put incredible stress on the relationship. And to your point, that stress can literally, it sounds like, alter brain chemistry and the way that people behave. Yeah.
It does, because you look at cortisol first, the first impact, it will increase adrenaline. Increase adrenaline, you increase aggressiveness and competitive, which is not great when you're confined in a 5-room apartment. If you're in a 3-story house like me, if I feel like crap, I can just go downstairs and my wife's upstairs, so we're good, right? But if you're in an apartment, that's pretty hard to do. And it will also impact glutamate. I mean, cortisol, the stress hormone, increases the production of glutamate and also the sensitivity to it, which means that you're now more responsive to emotions. So when you feel good, you feel amazing. But when you feel like crap, you feel like the old shit.
Amplified, yeah.
You would amplify your emotion while you're under high adrenaline. I mean, you're going to throw knives within a few weeks. But the problem is that the longer the situation lasts, the more the impact will be profound because you keep targeting those neurotransmitters. So stress will have a huge impact. On personality. So you can change that. But to get back to your question about kids, there's a genetic component, but what you do in the first 2 or 3 years of a kid's life will have a huge impact on their brain chemistry. It's true for watching screens, but also nutrition. Okay. For example, as soon as Jaden was able to eat solid food, we started eating eggs and meat. That's the first 2 things he started eating.
No kidding. We're going through that We're going through that right now with our youngest. Yeah. I think it was mangoes, organic mangoes, and then followed by blueberry, and then not a fan of carrots. Not a fan of carrots.
But the eggs and meat, as much as a kid can eat them, it's great because it has very high in choline, which will increase the production of acetylcholine, so they can learn a lot better.
Oh, interesting.
Using probiotics, vitamin D, and fish oil. I've always added fish oil, vitamin D, and probiotics to the evening bib.
Yeah. Oh, that's smart.
Probiotics.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The microbiome, in your stomach, has a huge impact on neurotransmitters production. So serotonin, and the more serotonin you have, the more easily you can tolerate with stress. You can tolerate stress. The less anxiety you have, the less likely you are to become depressed, and the more easily you can adjust your behavior. Okay, people with low serotonin have very high adaptation issues. They have problems shutting their brain down. And again, it's not to brag, but Jaden was sleeping 12 hours straight from the moment he was 3 months old. And he had one night where he didn't sleep because he was teething. Yeah. But even then, the other nights, even when he was teething, he would sleep 12 hours straight.
A lot of parents are listening right now, and they're going to get your email and they're just going to start trolling your inbox. They're so jealous. Yeah. Maybe one of them. That's
well, I think that one of the reasons is that it's balanced brain chemistry. And the first symptom of low serotonin you just can't shut your brain down. Yeah. And you also have panic attacks. You will choke under pressure. So that's one big problem. And so athletes, they need to be optimized. So the problem is, of course, once you're an adult, you can still impact brain chemistry. But more importantly, you need to minimize stress that will, to make sure that at least you become the better version of yourself.
Yeah. And I've that's something that, more and more research continues to validate this. And like what you're saying falls in line with what I was finding through personal experience, but just like the compounding effects of stress on every area of my life, and like, as once I had kids and was married and I was working, for a tech startup, and there was a lot of pressure because I'm in sales. And it was like, man, it was like the stress experienced in the arena of work had so many like ramifications on like my mood at home, how I was sleeping, and then consequentially how I felt the next morning when I woke up. And it was like the research that I continue to stumble upon and conversations that I have with folks like yourself continue to validate it. But it's like, God, stress just seems to be like the start of the snowball.
Absolutely.
It can unravel so many things.
More than that, it's the snowstorm.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it this way, okay, and it's purely physiological. Stress, what it really is, it's the tiger you're facing when you're a caveman. Okay?
Right.
The body doesn't know the difference. Any kind of stressor actually stimulates the same stress response. It increases cortisol.
Yeah.
You don't have 10,000 stress hormone in your body. You have cortisol. And the function of cortisol, people call it the stress hormone. I call it the readiness hormone.
Right.
The function of cortisol is to make sure that your body is capable of facing any enemy. Okay. As soon as it's released, your body is in defensive or offensive mode. I'm fighting something or I'm defending against something.
Yeah.
Right? And your brain, cortisol will trigger all the responses in your brain and body that puts you in the best possible state to fight that stress. One of it is increasing adrenaline. Cortisol increases adrenaline. As we saw earlier, it makes you think faster. It makes you react faster. It makes you more confident. You have a feeling of being strong. You are more creative because your brain is working overtime. Right. Your muscles are stronger. You're contracting harder. Your muscle tone is higher. Like one of the reasons you'll notice a lot of people will get headaches or back pain when they're under stress. Okay. Huh. The reason behind that is simply that the adrenaline increase muscle tone. Your muscles become tighter, become harder. Because if your muscles are already contracted, because muscle tone, how hard your muscle feels, it's nothing more than your muscles being partially contracting so that they will be ready to jump at gun. See what I mean? If it's contracted at like, if you go in a sprinting block and you're asleep, everything is relaxed, there's no way you can
Right, you're not going to contract, You
need to be wound like a tight ball, then you can explode. Same thing. So if your body wants to be ready, it will contract your muscles so that you can more easily explode. Now, the problem is if you have too much adrenaline, your muscle will become tight. Instead of being just firm and hard, it will become tight.
Yeah.
And if they become tight, they are shortening, and that will create tension around the neck. You can even like squeeze the nerve there. Then you're going to have the tight hip flexors that can actually lead to back problems.
Yeah.
So you don't actually have back problems. You don't have neck problems. It's just you have too much muscle tone. So that would be one issue. Then you have problems sleeping because adrenaline, what it does, it speeds your brain up.
Yeah.
If it speeds your brain up, you can't shut it down to go to sleep. So that just compounds everything.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I can't remember where I picked it up. And I was just talking to someone about this the other day, but this idea of, cortisol not necessarily being a stress hormone. And we weren't talking about cortisol by name, but like my buddy had to go give a speech, and it was in front of a fairly large group of people, but more importantly, a group of people he really respected. And so he was getting a lot of anxiety around it. And I remember it must have been a book or maybe a podcast. I don't know where I picked it up, but it was like, the stress that you're experiencing isn't inherently a negative, right? It's actually your body getting prepared, like you said, for battle or flight, right? So I was like, look, you got to think of it in terms of like, it's your body and mind are getting prepared to do something great. Like take that and try and kind of repurpose it. And he was like, will you quit talking about your body for 2 seconds? I was like, you're missing the point, man. Like you gotta
actually
go ahead.
It's funny because what you're doing is actually the best thing you can do.
Okay, well, that's what I want to ask you. Yeah, is what's your recommendation for folks?
The best way to overcome like what we would see as psychological problems, anxiety, stress, is basically making it as objective as possible. Because if you understand everything that's going on, then you can actually look at it from like you can reduce the emotional load of what's going on.
Yeah.
The stress is not positive or negative. It just puts your body in the optimum state to fight a tiger or run away from a tiger. The problem is when you start to panic about the state you are in, then it just snowballs and it increases adrenaline even more. Now you're losing control of your brain. That's the thing. People misunderstand anxiety. Anxiety is nothing more than your brain firing too fast.
Okay.
It's you can either speed your neurons up or slow them down.
Yeah.
Okay. And the faster the faster your neurons fire, you're thinking faster. I'm reacting faster. I'm stronger. But if they're going too fast, thinking faster becomes overthinking.
Yeah.
Reacting faster becomes overreacting. Muscles contracting harder become tense and tight muscles.
Right.
Athletes choke under pressure because what? They are overthinking, overreacting, and they're losing their motor pattern because they're tight.
Yeah.
In real life, it's the same thing. What happens is if you have too much adrenaline for the neurotransmitter that are calming your brain down, you have too much of the neurotransmitter that speed the brain up, not enough that calms you down. Okay.
Yep.
So what happens is your brain is going so fast, you're losing control of your thought process. And your brain is making stories up. You're creating scenarios in your head.
Yeah.
You have an emotional load of scenario. And the faster the brain works, the more the brain can convince you that those scenarios are actually real.
Right.
So that's a really bad combination.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, I guess you kind of already gave one recommendation. It's right. It's like objectively identify what's happening. Yeah. You know, I guess maybe it's like, it's don't internalize it as it's like, this is your state of being, like there's something wrong with you. It's like, no, objectively, this is your body responding to a stressor. I don't know if most people approach things in that way in their day-to-day life, but like, you know, what advice do you have for folks? Because this is something that's universal, whether you're an athlete, whether you have a business meeting, whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, you need to find out like the reason why that's happening, because in reality, it could be that you have a stressor that creates too much adrenaline, or you might be lacking in the neurotransmitter responsible for balancing your brain down. Now, poor nutrition, for example, poor nutrition can lead to serotonin problem. Serotonin, the neurotransmitter that is, I call it the equalizer.
Okay.
Serotonin allows you to keep your brain in the ideal state for what you need to do right now. If you need to be, the example I could give you, the serotonin is like the brake pedal in your car. It's not on or off. It can allow you to just slow down a bit, or even like you release it and you can go a bit faster. Serotonin does that. If you are in a situation where your brain needs to be amped up, serotonin will allow you to do that. If you need to calm yourself down, serotonin will do that. It will make your neural state in accordance to what you need to do. Going back to like the personality, like Donald Trump, the 1A personalities in my system, they don't have serotonin, and that's genetic. Okay, in their case, they are what we call poor methylator. Their methylation cycle is really bad. I won't go through all the cycles here, but basically the end product is they have low serotonin. Okay. They have low serotonin, low glutamate, low acetylcholine because of that, which means that they can't adapt. They will always they will always stay the same. And oddly enough, you have another personality in my type, in my category that the type 3, which is the dramatic opposite. Introverts, like think the accountant, the IT guy, the guy who like never gets out of his office, who is super introverted, super shy, always does the same thing at the same time, OCD behavior to the limit, never pick fights. They are actually extremely similar from a brain chemistry perspective to Donald Trump.
Ah, interesting.
The actual personality, the external personality is completely different because of one neurotransmitter. But in reality, both have adaptation problems. That's why the type 3 is OCD. The type 3 will internalize all this stressor. The 1A will externalize by controlling other. The type 3 will control himself to the limit. The 1A will control others. That's his way of dealing with the adrenaline. The type 3, also high adrenaline, they can't break it down, super anxious, can't sleep, and to try to control that adrenaline, they will stick to things they are super comfortable with to avoid more adrenaline.
Right. Yeah,
See
yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean? So the difference is only one neurotransmitter. It's called GABA. GABA is if serotonin is the brake pedal, GABA is the parking brake. It's the on or off switch. So the type 1A, they have lots of GABA. So they can actually shut down when needed. They cannot modulate their behavior, but they can shut down. So they can calm themselves. So they're still good under pressure. So they can like perform like crazy, then they shut down and they can go back up again. The type 3, their brain is always firing. The overthinker, paralysis by overanalysis. They get to sleep because they're in bed thinking. They can't make a decision because they are weighing the pros and the cons. Yeah, but have you thought of this, of that? And they never make decisions because of that. They need all the facts. As clients, for example, they will be the client that, okay, I just spent 60 minutes teaching you the squat with all the technical details. You're still going to ask me 20 questions. And that's not because like you didn't listen. It's not because you're an asshole. It's because you need to understand every little detail to reduce the anxiety that will increase adrenaline, getting you out of control. It's a survival mechanism. So behavior is oriented by there's no such thing as a good person. There's no such thing as a bad person. We are what our brain chemistry is, and we act to give our brain what it needs to feel satisfied.
Yeah.
The type 3, they need to keep everything under control because they lose control inside. The 1A, the assholes, they control others. That's their way of maintaining the feeling of control that they think they're losing because of the high adrenaline.
So that's so interesting. And so how then does this relate to how you so people can go and they can take this test on your site, and I'll link to the site. How does this then translate to how you actually program for your athletes then? Once they've gone through the neurotyping, you or they have an understanding of hopefully where they fall kind of on this scale.
I have plenty of videos explaining, for example, what. So first of all, we have 5 main personality types. We have some the 1A, the 1B, the 2A, 2B, and type 3. The 1A and 1B are the dopamine dominant personalities. So they are competitive, they are driven, they are highly motivated, but for different reasons. The 1A is dopamine dominant because once he releases dopamine and adrenaline, he can't break it down. So he's always here, always here. Yeah, exactly. He can't stop. Workaholic. They love to argue. They can't accept losing. They are even sociopath. They can actually be like at the limit of sociopath. Just like the type 3 are obsessive compulsive, they will be more sociopathic because they're very low empathy. The 1B, on the other hand, the 1B breaks down dopamine so fast that their receptors remains extraordinarily sensitive because they are stimulated. As soon as they're stimulated, you can take it out. Think of the best skilled athlete you've ever played with. Okay, super lazy in practice, doesn't want to train hard. When he gets between games, he's joking around the locker room. He's having fun. At the end of the game, everything's cool, right? But when you need to turn it on, he's the guy you want in your corner. He's the guy that as a coach, when I was younger, I would say, "But dude, if only that guy trained hard, how good he would be," right? We always think of sprinters are like that all the time. A sprinter, it takes an hour just to get into the workout. Okay, basketball players, highly skilled basketball players,
I know
for example,
a lot of guys that fit this bill.
But that's because these guys break down dopamine and adrenaline so fast. Even when they are basically always low adrenaline, low dopamine, super chill, relax. I want to watch Netflix all day. But they are so responsive to both of them, dopamine and adrenaline, and as soon as there's a little bit of competition going on, dude, they are machines. Okay, so that's different. They are both dopamine dominant. And the type 1B is the personality that will oftentimes become easily addicted. Addicted to drugs, addicted to video games, because the video games target the dopamine receptors like crazy. And these guys are super sensitive to it. They will be highly likely to become dependent on drugs like amphetamines, even MDMA, even though it targets the serotonin and the dopamine. Anyway, so they are more of an addictive personality because they're so strong, and they always want to try new things because they get a big pleasure response for everything. They will be like anyway. So that's the type 1. The type 2A is like me. The 2A is the type in the middle. The 2A is the actor. The 2A is the mimicker. The 2A is the person who adapts the most. They will change their personality based on the person they're with, the situation, and what they need to accomplish. Because from a neurotransmitter perspective, they are balanced. They have pretty much the same level of everything, no real dominance. So they can actually pretend to be anything. Me, like right now, the person you see right now is the complete opposite of what I really am. And depending on who I'm doing the podcast with, my person even then will change. My language will change. If I'm doing a podcast with like a guy with lots of tattoos, I will swear a lot more, for example.
I get it. Yeah.
And that's why for me, for example, and that was like always been a big issue in my relationship, is that my wife is a family-driven person. And she has a huge, like 100-person and big family reunion, stuff like that. I can't do it because the day before I actually get fucking anxious.
Right.
Anxious. I never understand why. To me, it's like a huge stress. I couldn't understand why. I've spoken in front of 400 people, but speaking in front of a crowd, I know these guys like me. A crowd is one person.
Yeah.
I'm one person. What created the anxiety is me. My modus operandi is to create a persona that fits the person I'm talking to or the situation. Okay. So if I'm speaking in front of a crowd, I'm Chris, the speaker. That's fine. If I'm coaching 30 athletes, it's Chris, the coach. Even though it's 30 different personalities, it's fine. If I'm in a family reunion, there's going to be 100 people. What personally do I adopt? To whom do I want to relate?
Yeah, and each interaction, you go through that process of mirroring and
You can imagine the stress on the brain. That's huge. That's also why I stopped doing personal training.
Oh, okay.
With personal training, with athletes, you pretty much always get the same thing, right? Well, or like more or less. With personal, like in regular, because when I moved back to Canada, my wife lived in a super small town, so very few athletes there. So I started working more with general population. And what was really hard was when every time I saw a new client on my calendar, I would freak out. Because I need that guy to like me. I need people to. I need to be liked. I have low self-esteem. I need other people to like me to feel good myself. And for me, the strategy is I'm gonna project an image you are gonna like. But if I don't know you, or you just see your name in my schedule, I have no idea who I need to project. That's created lots of stress, and that happened 8 to 10 times a day. And then every time, even when I knew the client, I still needed to project a different personality.
Yeah.
But that's draining. So once I got home, I had no more energy to be a good person for my wife.
Yeah. No, I get, and again, like it's funny because, and I imagine a lot of people must feel this way when they go through this exercise. It's like I can see bits and pieces of myself in a lot of these categories, and so, but yeah, I can empathize with that because again, I'm in sales. That's a big piece of it, right? Like the whole game is like if you're selling something that you have a lot of confidence in, you feel that can help the person, you're going to do much better. But a big piece of that is the mirroring, right? Like ultimately people want to work with people they like. So subconsciously or not, when you go in that room, like you want them to like you. And often like you have to present an image of yourself that is going to be well received. And it does, to your point, become like a lot more complicated when you're dealing with a room of 10 people versus one. Right? It's like, oh, what image of myself am I putting off that's going to get the majority of these people to be receptive to what I'm trying to say?
That's why the best salesmen, they are either the type 1A or the type 2A. The type 1A is like the guy who is super loud. I mean, like remember the movie Tommy Boy?
It's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, like the father, the way he was, right? Like
Bob Callahan.
Yeah, exactly. That's a type 1A, like to the T, like super salesman. Okay, extremely charismatic, fun to be around, high energy, big personality. You just want to say yes to that guy, even if you don't need it, right? And the 2A is the person who will give them what they want to hear. I will like relate to them. We will share stories. And oh yeah, I had the same thing happen to me. Oh, isn't that awesome? Have you been there? Do you know this guy? Name dropping, like just create like one-on-one rapport to facilitate the sale, because that's the weapon they have. These are the two best type of salesmen.
No, that completely makes sense. And again, thinking about people who I know in sales who have done really well, just like a quick checklist, they fall into those categories.
Because when you look at the other personalities, you look at the type 3, for example, which I haven't covered yet, like the OCD personality. When they try to sell, they will like basically read you the user's manual. Like super technical, all the details, and they're just boring as hell, right? So they are great to explain a product, but not to sell, because for sales, what you need is create an emotional response. So that's what you need, right? So, and you can't do that with technical specs unless you're talking
unless someone who's going to get jazzed about, the specs of the widget.
Yeah, you do have some of these guys, but they're pretty. And the type 2Bs, which is the other personality I haven't covered yet, these are like the overly emotional, I want to share everything, talk to me about your feelings, but I'm easily offended. I take everything personal. Any kind of failure, I take super hard. These guys can't deal with sales, because if someone says no to you, it's like the end of your day. So they are great psychologists, they are great nurses, they are the most empathetic person around, but they can't deal with rejection. They don't make great salesmen. And the 1B, they're not driven enough. They are like super skilled. They're great at everything, but they don't have the same, like, if they don't have the adrenaline themselves, they won't be able to communicate. They're too chill to be great salesmen.
Got it.
1A and 2A.
So yeah, that makes sense. And now I'm thinking too, like in the corporate world, right? We've done a lot of these tests. I feel like there's, and this could be my shortcoming, but there's never that next step of like, hey, we've identified this about you. Here's how you can take this information to like make the most of whatever your endeavor is, right? And what I think is so interesting about what you're doing with the neurotyping is, if I'm understanding it correctly, you actually alter the training based upon the neurotype of the individual. But maybe this is a great place to end today. Can you just talk a little bit about conceptually how you start to alter the actual programming for your athletes based upon the neurotype that they identify or have been measured?
You need to look at the various variables we can deal with. We have intensity. Intensity is the amount of weight you're lifting. Like, is it 90%, 85, 70%? Then you have intensiveness. Intensiveness is how hard you're pushing your sets. So when I program, I don't only include how much weight you should be using. I give you an RPE scale. RPE is rate of perceived effort. Like a 10, you go to your absolute limit on the set until the bar cannot move anymore. An 8, you keep like 2 reps in a tank, for example. So intensiveness would be how high you go on that scale.
Okay.
Then you have volume. Volume is how much workload you have in your session, how much total reps, sets times reps you're doing, and exercise, of course. Then you would have the rest intervals, short rest, long rest. Again, that depends on the person. Then you would have the number of exercises in a session and what kind of exercise you're using. Mostly big compound movement, more isolation exercise, machines versus free weights. And finally, you have everything that relates to how often do you vary your exercises. So these are all variables that will be influenced by your brain chemistry. For example, if you look at the type 1A and 1B, they are the people who are the most driven to beat an objective. They need to feel like they are winning the workout, because every time they lift more weight, they get a pleasure response, dopamine response. And they are the one who are the most dominant to dopamine. So the 1A and 1B, they will be more driven by performance. So we're going to use mostly big basic lifts. Normally, you're going to use lower reps, heavier weights, because that's what they want. If I give them sets of 20 reps, they're going to fall asleep before the end of the workout. If I tell, and then you look at intensiveness. intensiveness, the 1A is the person who needs the most intensiveness. So 1A, the overachiever, the workaholic, the bigger than life personality, they will go to their limit at every set they do. That's how they are built. Okay, they want to do everything to win. The problem is if you go heavy and if you push every set to your limit, there's no way you can tolerate volume.
Do a lot. Yeah.
No way you can tolerate volume. So the 1A would be the type that has the lowest amount of volume. For example, I'm training a member of the national bobsleigh team, 1A personality. Awesome. He does 2 to 3 exercises per session for a total of 6 to 9 work sets for the whole workout. Not per exercise, for the whole workout. All he can do. Otherwise, he just crashes.
Because he does such heavy weight and such intensiveness. Yeah.
Exactly. And if I don't give him the heavy weights or the intensiveness, he loses motivation. Yep. And on top of that, these guys, as soon as they release adrenaline, it stays with them forever. And volume and intensity are 2 things that increase adrenaline. So I cannot have both high, otherwise the adrenaline will be through the roof and they're going to overtrain because of that, neurological overtraining. Then we look at, if you continue with the 1A, they won't need that much variation. Once again, they can't do many exercises in a workout. That would be more of an acetylcholine issue. I mean, to be honest, if I were to look at all the types, it would take about 3 hours to explain the reason between the variable. So, but the 1A, they can't do many exercises in a session, 2, 3, 4 at the most. They should stick to mostly big basic lifts, and they don't need variation. In fact, if they feel like they can still get stronger in a movement, and you take that movement out of their workout, they're going to lose motivation because they want to win the exercise. See what I mean?
100%. And I'm like, oh man, this is kind of hitting home a little bit. But
so the only time where you can actually change the exercises is if they've been stuck forever on that movement. Now you can, I want to win another movement. They also need longer rest intervals. They naturally want to train fast because their adrenaline is here. But if you train too fast, you increase adrenaline even more and they can crash because of that. So that would be the 1A. The 1B is fairly similar in that they use mostly big compound movement, lower reps, explosive stuff, plyometrics, jump throws because they're built for speed, but they need variation. The 1B, they have, because of the high acetylcholine and high serotonin, they need variation. They need changes. That's why they want to try plenty of new experiences in their life. They want to do everything. In training, they have the brain capacity to learn new movement because of the acetylcholine. These are the guys, for example, who make great CrossFit athletes or great decathlon guys.
Got it.
Because in decathlon, CrossFit, you need to be excellent in many different complex movements. But let's say CrossFit, for example, you probably need to be good at like 30 different exercises. And out of these 30 exercises, at least 10 are amazingly complex, like walking on your hands, a full Olympic snatch, a full clean and jerk, muscle ups. These things are super hard to master. There's no way someone with bad motor learning can be good at all of that and perform, because they would need, me personally, I would need to practice all these skills every week. Otherwise, I'm going to lose them. Okay. But if you look at the top CrossFit athletes, once they have learned a muscle up, they don't need to practice it. It's going to be with them for, they don't need to practice a snatch. It's going to be with them forever. Now, I've been an Olympic weightlifter for 8 years. If I stop doing the Olympic lifts for a month, it's like I've never done them before.
No kidding. That's so interesting.
Yes, I have really lost it. I mentioned that I'm starting playing golf again, and I want to be competitive in golf. I played when I was younger. I made the provincial championship, which is the equivalent of the state championship in the US. Cool. I was like I was practicing 8 hours a day because I have poor motor learning. When I tried to play golf again, it's like I've never swung a club before. And just to improve, I need to practice at least 2 hours a day. That's why I held off on getting back to golf until I could actually spend the time.
Commitment it would take to get to where you want to be.
Yeah, but less than 2 hours, I actually don't even improve because I have really bad motor learning. Yeah. So the 1B, they need variation, and they can actually do the variation because even if they stop squatting for 3 months, they get back to it, they're still getting stronger if they train their legs with other movements. If you look at the 2A like me, these are the guys who can't follow a program. They will start on the program. After 2 weeks, they get bored. They want to do something else. The 2A, they need to be they have an emotional attachment to a workout. I'm excited about the workout. Okay, that's the workout by Christian. That's the workout that Klokov did for his Olympic lift. That's a workout that Bo Jackson did when he trained. I need an emotional attachment. See what I mean? Yeah. But after 2 or 3 weeks, that emotion, that excitement, it just goes away. Now you're looking for something different, or even worse, I'm reading an article. Oh, that looks so cool. I'm going to do that. Then the next time you read an article, you're getting excited by the new article. I'm going to switch to that.
Got it.
Very, very hard. I mean, I'm a coach. I've trained athletes in 28 different sports. I've never been able to follow a program for more than 3 weeks. Honest to God. And I was a pretty decent lifter. I mean, I made the national championship in Olympic weightlifting. Okay. But I could never stick to a program. Never.
Well, and you know what's funny too? And I think about this a lot because so many. I mean, so we were going to do this thing with my good buddy, and I'll wrap this up here in a minute. But he played Division I college basketball. He went and played basketball professionally in Europe. He's now a commentator for ESPN, and we were going to do this thing pre-coronavirus called the Savage 250. Right? He's like 6'7". He's just a big guy, but he's been putting on weight. And what I was telling him, I was like, dude, whatever you do, I could give you the workout program that I do. I'm happy to share what I'm doing, but is that what's going to interest you? And I was thinking just in very broad terms of look, if someone's passionate about something, they're going to put more effort and energy into it. What's cool 100%. Is to see the way that you've broken it down, based on these neurotype categories. And, there's actually a structure of some sort that is what I'm hearing that you could adhere to that's going to kind of better suit neurologically, what you're going to respond to. And I just feel whether it's my mom, whether it's my buddy who's an ex-college basketball player, whether it's someone who just wants to get leaner, it's this might give you direction in terms of what sort of program you would respond to for longer.
And you said the most important thing when you mentioned that if you're excited to do something, you're going to train hard. You're going to be honest, the only thing that really matters is training hard. That's the only thing that matters, because to be honest, if you take the most basic, ordinary training program done 100%, and you compare that to the best program ever done at 80%, you're going to get better results from the basic program. So if something excites you and you're motivated to do it, you're going to get better results. So for example, to get back to the last two neurotypes, the type 2Bs, for example, they are more insecure. They feel more strongly, right? They are afraid of failure. So they need feedback within their workout that they're doing a good job. If we talk about lifting, what is the feedback that you actually feel inside your body that you're doing a good job with lifting? It's the pump. It's a mind-muscle connection. Those muscles burn, right? So if you give them a deadlift, it won't give them what they want because you don't feel a pump on a deadlift. If they're doing cardio, these are the guys that you will see on a treadmill, they're hanging for their life with a puddle of sweat on the bottom because they need to prove that they're working hard. It's funny because one of my former clients, and it's funny because it was just on a video about him recently, Joe Buck, the sportscaster. I was training Joe when I was in St. Louis, and he's a typical 2B. It's funny because people think of this Joe is this alpha personality. Even when he did if you see the what's the show with Hank Azaria about a baseball sportscaster? Have you seen that? Anyway, Joe Buck had a role in that, and he was this big alpha male asshole. But Joe is literally he's a type 2, super emotional. He wants to be loved by everybody. Probably daddy issues. I was this coach, this personal trainer, and he wanted to impress me. He wanted me to like him. Dude, you're fucking Joe Buck. Anyway, so the one thing he said is that I like your workouts because I feel like I'm accomplishing something. In reality, I was just doing some crazy stuff that left him out of breath and pump like crazy because I have the immediate feedback. So that is 2B. The workout, they need to feel good, to feel it in their body. It's not lifting more weight. It's having the internal confirmation that you're doing a good job. If you give them an exercise and they don't feel it in the right muscle, they will get discouraged. I'm not doing, even if you can, you know what, dude, you lifted 10 more pounds. Yeah, but I didn't feel it. They need to feel it. And the type 3, the last types, what they need is they don't want variation. They will stick. These are the guys who will stick for the same program for 20 years because in fact, they need to be comfortable with what they're doing. They can't push hard enough until they feel comfortable with their movements.
Right. Oh man. See, you know what I'm finding with so many of these conversations is, because we could have sat here and been like, oh, like what research papers did you pull this from, like that? And we can certainly down the road, maybe we have that conversation. I doubt it. But like, for me, this passes very much like my gut, test. I'm like, yes, I know that person, or yes, I find myself in that category. And when I think about it, that's exactly what I respond to. And I bet there's a lot of folks listening across the spectrum that are saying like, oh man, like that just has me pegged. And when I think about it, like that's exactly what I respond to in the gym. So
dude, I have people in seminars cry when I was presenting the type, because I finally understand why. And honest to God, the 2 reasons why I started the system was first, because instinctively from my 20 odd years of coaching, I knew that not all personalities responded to the same training programs. But I wanted to wait. I've always done it instinctively, but I needed a way to systematize it so I could teach it. Second is I wanted to know the reason behind all my psychological issues.
So it's like self-analysis.
I have zero self-esteem. I don't have a true personality. It's always I always saw myself as soft because I'm always agreeing with the person I'm talking to. I'm always changing my personality. Of course, big issues with the family, my own relationship. I don't like physical contact, and I want to understand all of that because because when you look at my childhood, for example, nothing could explain the lower self-esteem I had. I mean, I had a great childhood. My parents were awesome. I was good at many, many different sports. I had friends, great at school. Nothing could justify it as long as I can remember. I've always been a people pleaser, even when I was 6. So there must be a genetic component to that. So I want to understand the reason behind those personality traits.
Oh, wow. This is so interesting. So I know I'm going to do this. I'm going to take the neurotyping test for people who, let's see 2 things, right? If they want to look into neurotyping.
I would wait a few weeks because I did a new version of the test, which is more accurate.
Great.
So
so we'll wait, but Thib Army, right? ThibArmy.com. That's where they can take the neurotyping test. For people who want to follow along and just, follow what your team and you were doing, where's the best place to do that?
Well, Thib Army is a good place to start. We're going to actually revamp the whole website in the next month or 2. Yeah. And then, of course, social media, Thib Army on Instagram. All the crazy methods I use with the athletes I'm training.
I love watching you. I love looking at your Instagram.
Dude, one of the bobsleigh guys I'm training 2 guys on a bobsleigh team. He's stuck at home right now, like pretty much everybody, but he bought a squat rack. And we're doing this thing where he's squatting every day, and he's squatting 200 kilos, so 440 pounds, cold, so no warm up, 10 sets throughout the day. So he will do one set
so horrible.
Well, it's a high frequency of practice. And on top of his regular workouts, just a crazy experiment. But he is that personality that actually loves that. He needs to be excited about a concept. So you know what? For a month, for 3 weeks, let's squat every day. I do that. Awesome.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so Thib Army. So we're gonna have people hold off, and this is going to be released a little bit after that you and I spoke. So as soon as that new test is out, we'll make sure to link to it. I'm going to do it. I'm really excited. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to have my wife do it as well. I think that'll actually be a fun exercise.
One thing I'm playing, an idea I have is someone should do the test for you. Like the person who knows you the best, you should do your own you should do your test. And then your wife should do the test answering for you. Then you compare both. That would be a more accurate.
It'd be a bit more objective. And you're right. That self-confirmation bias. Okay. Well, we'll play around with that. Well, let me know if you need a guinea pig for that. We'll sign up. But this is awesome. And thank you so much. This is so enlightening. And I think so interesting, right? Because it's so easy to get caught up in like, hey, like, what's the best workout for this goal? And like, what does that mean in terms of reps and sets? And I think this is a really interesting and important perspective because it's coming from the other angle. It's like, well, what gets you fired up and what are you going to respond to? And like, what's going to keep you motivated, to your point, to actually put in the work necessary to adapt?
Same thing with diet.
Yeah.
I mean, even if I tell you, even if keto, for example, was the best diet known to men, which it isn't, but if you feel like crap on it or you don't like it, you will be stick with it for like 3 weeks. You won't get the results you want. So maybe going like a more moderate diet that gets you excited, even if it was not as good on paper, it will still give you better results down the line.
To it.
It's not about optimal. It's about like maximum effort over the longest period of time. That's what gives you results.
It's so funny you say that, because that is, I mean, what I've been saying, and I've talking to people in a broad spectrum so far in this, and this is like the 14th or 15th episode. I mean, like people who work with, athletes operating kind of like the fringes of human performance. There's no secret. It all keeps coming back to like consistency over time, right? Like you said, maximum effort consistently over time. It's like, so I think that's a really important lesson for people. So Christian, man, thank you so much. It's been an awesome conversation, and I appreciate you being gracious with your time.
It was awesome, man.